Hi, I'm Sive and this is Stories in Sive. This is my channel. We talk about books, and today's video is going to be a very simple, chill chat about some books that I have loved recently. I haven't done too many reviews this year on my channel, and so I just wanted to take the time to just go ahead and bookmark these amazing reads that I've had so far. We are past the first quarter of the year, and I'm really pleased to say that this year so far of reading has just been impeccable. So I'm excited to share some recent 5 and 4-star reads with you today. Okay, so I kind of just took a look at my shelves really quickly, and I've pulled 5 books that I've recently given 5 stars, and let's talk about them. I'm going to talk about the most surprising thing about this list first. Definitely the most surprising thing, if you know my reading, is I love fantasy. Sci-fi has not really been my thing, like, ever, but I have 2 books on this list that are sci-fi that I've recently given 5 stars. For this first one I'll talk about is Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. I also read at the beginning of the year, like in January, Skyward, and I gave this 5 stars, so I'm kind of just like grouping these 2 books together. So these 2 sci-fis, which are YA, and then also The First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis. This is an adult sci-fi. I've given 3 sci-fi books 5 stars so far this year, which is absolutely insane. Definitely not reflective of how my reading has been in the past. So let's start first, like I said, with Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Skyward series. It's not a trilogy. Like I said, it is YA, and the series follows our character Spenza, and in the world that she is on called Detrius, this is obviously set in space, there's a very heavy influence that comes from being a pilot. It is what a lot of kids like wish they could be, and they grow up to be, and then they can go and enter into a school and go through pretty intensive training to become a pilot for Detrius. So this character, Spenza, her father was a pilot, and there was an incident in which he deserted his flight team. And so she has a like massive chip on her shoulder, but she really wants to be a pilot and like prove herself. The reason why pilots are needed in the first place is because they are under attack semi-regularly from these aliens called the Krell. There ends up being a massive conspiracy. There is a few politics, especially in this second book. Without being spoilery, there's a setting change that happens here, and Spence is basically thrown into a brand new situation in which she is like doing some spy work, we'll say. And there's a lot of like different groups of peoples that have really rough histories, and though no one is technically at war right now, you can still really feel a lot of the dissension in between these societies. So it's been very interesting. I would love to be picking up the 3rd book soon, but there were actually 2 or 3 novellas that were put out that go in between this 2nd book and the 3rd book, and so I'll probably be picking up those before I get to Cytonic. This series is just amazing. Like, it's really is that good. I sprint read the first book. I had read the first 150 pages, was kind of like, oh yeah, it's like good, and then once I passed that 150 page mark, I read like the rest of the book in a day. And it was very good. So going and picking up Starsight was the easiest thing ever, and it was so encouraging that both of these have been 5 stars. So I definitely have high hopes for this series. I'm very excited about the direction that this book took. Like, it definitely wasn't any sort of repeated information or repeated like plot points or plot formulas. This was just like a brand new story, same characters that we're falling in love with, and I just cannot wait to see what Brandon Sanderson is going to put these characters through. It's already been a lot so far, and this is also my first Brandon Sanderson series. He is a well-acclaimed author in his fantasy genre, so I'm really excited because if I love these as much as I do, like, he has an impeccable backlist that is just full of series that people love, and so if I can find a place for myself in his writing, that would just opened up so many doors for me. So I'll go ahead and talk about the first sister as well while we're talking about sci-fi. So this book follows our main character. She is nameless and voiceless, and she's called the first sister, and she's involved in a sisterhood. It's almost like a priesthood. Every woman who's a part of the sisterhood is a mediator between people and their god figure, and so they're definitely in a place of like religious power. And this specific sister that we are following is on a ship right now, and she is there to basically, her and her other sisters who are on the ship are there to basically just like meet the needs of the people and the men who are on that ship. It like kind of felt like a parallel between like the Catholic way that they do confession, and they're there as mentors and mediators essentially. So that's what this character is doing. She's, like I said, on a ship, and so a new captain comes, and the first sister, again, is a very coveted position because you are only there to serve the captain. All the other sisters have to serve any soldier or whatever who comes up to them and needs their help. And so the first sister only has to cater to the needs of one person rather than the whole mass of soldiers who are on the ship. And so she basically begins to get to know this captain, and her sisterhood asks her to spy on them. This is a dual perspective story, and we follow the first sister's perspective as well as a soldier on the other side of this war that's going on. His name is Leto. He's a very skilled warrior. A lot of this book is the first sister and Leto's separate exploration of their allegiances. Their allegiances are being tested. The sides in which they have taken or were born into are asking a lot of them, and they are starting to second guess whether their authority figures have their best interest in mind. This book was absolutely exceptional. One of the only books recently that has captured my attention within the first like 5 pages. I knew I was gonna love this book the second I started it, and that's very rare. The writing was just so good, and the plot was very quick. We like immediately jumped into action. The first book in a series, in my mind, is always going to be one of the harder ones to read because you are acquainting yourself with the characters and potentially a new world, a new magic system, a brand new set of politics. But the way that this first book was written, it just made all of that information so easy to digest, and those little like pieces of information were never like whole paragraphs or like big info dumpy chapters. Like, it was very subtle, it was very nuanced, and it was done through a lot of dialogue, which I really appreciated, which is interesting because one of our perspectives is voiceless. Like, she can't talk, she's mute. She also has a very strong inner monologue, and that kind of replaces the absence of dialogue for her. I haven't picked up the second book for this series yet, though I'm quite desperate to, and I will definitely be doing that this summer. So the next book I want to talk about is my only other fiction in this stack, and that is Insomnia by Sarah Pinsborough. And this book is a thriller. It's a psychological thriller by this author, the same author who did Behind Her Eyes, if you saw that on Netflix. So this follows our main character, Emma, and she is leading up to her 40th birthday, and she's beginning to have trouble falling asleep. This is significant for her because exactly the same time in her mother's life, 30 years before, the 2 weeks before her mother was about to turn 30, her mother stopped sleeping as well. And her mother had always struggled with mental health issues. However, all of the culmination of the nights of not sleeping up into her 40th birthday, she had a mental breakdown, and it was very traumatizing for Emma and her sister Phoebe. And so now, 30 years later, Emma is about to turn 40, and she is very paranoid, and it is definitely, you can tell it had been weighing on her mind for years and years. She's been dreading her 40th birthday her whole life. It essentially follows Emma and her family as they attempt to navigate some of the paranoia that she begins to experience. Her life as a lawyer begins to fall apart, her family life begins to fall apart, and there is definitely an element of, is this supernatural? How much of this is like reality? She's definitely an unreliable narrator, which I loved. So essentially this book was just like one of the most interesting and insane plots. Y'all, this book did not let up. every single chapter there was something crazy going on, and it just got even more and even more intense. And seeing from the perspective of Emma, like, just pulled me into this like descent into insanity and madness. The ending of this book was absolutely dynamic. It was everything that sometimes whenever a book is so good with the setup, the ending can really fall flat and be kind of disappointing. But this was an absolute like explosion of everything that had gone wrong, and it was thrilling. I was sitting there, my heart was pounding when I was reading this. It was just so good. The ending was exceptional. I was gonna rate this 4 stars anyways, but the ending like is what made it 5 stars for me. I loved this book. This book is definitely in like the top 5 thrillers I've ever read in my life, and oh my goodness. This is a new release. It came out last Tuesday or 2 Tuesdays ago in April 12th or something like that. If you are interested in good psychological thrillers, I can highly recommend this new release by her. It was just exceptional. So the next books I'm going to talk about are nonfiction, and the first is a poetry collection that is The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. And this is a nonfiction, like I said. It basically tells the story of her. I mean, it's more than just going through a breakup, because the breakup kind of has made her, it sounds like, has made her question a lot of societal standards and her familial standards, the expectations that are on her as a woman, as a daughter. This book follows her through a series of stages in her life, and so that's how she's like divided the poems up. The first section is called Wilting, then there's Falling, Rooting, Rising, and Blooming. And so that is definitely using the life of a flower as an analogy for the cycle that has happened in her life. This was absolutely beautiful. I've read her other collection, Milk and Honey, and it was really good. This one, though, it set itself apart. I don't know, it also could have been like the posture that I personally was in to be able to read this book. I often find someone's enjoyment of a book also has to do with where they are at in their life as well. And there were a few of these that were just very relatable and resonated with me and my soul a lot. And it was very beautiful. It was definitely heartbreaking and very hard to read at times, and I would look up trigger warnings before you go into this. I'm not a poetry connoisseur by any standard. I've probably read less than 10 collections in my life, but this just gave me a lot of hope that even though I kind of see myself as like, sometimes I don't get poetry, like I just don't get it, but this really was like an encouragement for me to read, in that like I can understand it. I can pull enjoyment and feeling and emotion out of poetry, and poetry is also something that's a little bit more like open for interpretation, and I very much enjoyed this collection because of that. And the last book I'm going to talk about in this video is another nonfiction, and this is Try Softer by Andi Kolber. And this is a fresh approach to move us out of anxiety, stress, and survival mode and into a life of connection and joy. This author is a therapist and works in trauma therapy, and she's also a Christian, and so she does have that biblical perspective, but also in some of the end chapters where she goes through like a practice, like a step 1, 2, 3, how to like put something into practice, she uses that Christian perspective as optional. So you can still pull a lot from this book even if you aren't a Christian. But this book was, gosh, life-changing. I'm just gonna read the back of it to you. In a world that tells us to try harder, it's time for something different. It's time to try softer. We can't seem to escape the allure of the try harder gospel, the message that if we just keep going, keep hustling, keep pretending everything is great, we'll find success and happiness. But clinical therapist Andi Kolber knows firsthand where this path leads. White knuckling leaves us overworked and overwhelmed, exhausted and numb. In Try Softer, you'll learn how to know and set your emotional and relational boundaries, make sense of the difficult experiences you've had, move through emotions rather than get stuck by them, and grow in self-compassion and quiet your inner critic. This book dives into a lot, let me tell you. It is very helpfully divided up into 2 parts. So the first part is context. It is science. It is giving the physiological and psychological context to why your brain reacts to things in certain ways. You have to go through exercises in this first chapter to help you identify your story. And in the second half, the second part of this book, you are then brought through some applicable, everyday, like day-to-day practical applications that you can put into practice in your life to help you try softer. The first half of the book was incredibly helpful. It gave me a lot of information that I didn't know. And then of course in the second half of the book, those like practical applications were just very helpful, and I learned a lot from this book. I would highly recommend this book to anyone who is struggling with anxiety and depression or has a very loud inner critic. I learned a lot from this book, and it was a very easy 5-star. So yeah, these are the books that I have recently been giving 5 stars. Some amazing wide variety. I'm so proud of myself for getting into some sci-fi and nonfiction, because my typical reading taste pretty much stays within fantasy and romance, but those genres haven't been delivering as much as the sci-fi genre for me at the moment. So please let me know what books you have given 5 stars recently, or just books you've really enjoyed. And also I'd love to know if you've read any of these and if you have loved them as much as I did. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you like other bookish content like this, feel free to subscribe. I would love to have you. And other than that, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video.